Switching topics right now, we often hear about the benefits of reading stories to our kids. It helps them appreciate reading. Grades boost, we know that, and it also helps us build a bond with our children.
But those stories can be even more powerful. Stories can be the secret to get your kids to do what you want. Ty Bennett is an author, speaker, and speech coach. You teach business professionals how to tell stories all the time. Why is this an important skill, do you think, for parents to learn too?
Well, I have 3 little kids, and I just found that kids love stories. Number one, if you go back to the beginning of time, storytelling was the earliest form of communication, and so our minds are genetically programmed to learn through stories. And studies show that kids especially really retain information when they learn it through a story. I mean, think about, we're constantly reading them stories, or they're watching movies, all sorts of things, and what they do is their minds attach the meaning to the message of the story. So if I were to give you an example, I mean, just think about like the tortoise and the hare. Everybody knows that story, but you automatically know the moral of the story, right? I mean, it's slow and steady wins the race. It's a message of consistency. And our kids retain that when we share it in a story. Another just version is Ugly Duckling. Everybody knows that story, but we also know the message. It's about being yourself. It's about being able to, you know, find your unique value in the world. And so when we share a story that works, our kids remember exactly what that is, and they remember the message that comes along with it.
So there's more than just the words on the page. They're absorbing that meaning behind the message.
Oh, absolutely. And there's an emotional attachment to it because they experience it, they feel it, and so it's more than just telling them, hey, this is something you should learn. If you want to teach them values or life lessons, it's a great way to really cement that message home for them.
Do you normally find that you have to tell them what the value or message is, or do they automatically pick it up just from hearing the story?
Well, I think there's a couple things. With kids especially, you should be very conversational. Ask them questions like, how would you feel if that happened, or what do you think you would do if you were in that situation? So ideally, they draw their own conclusion. But I think a lot of times you have to reiterate it, and there's no problem with that. You want to make sure that they get the message of that story, and so if you need to say, so the point of that is this, that's okay too, but if you can help draw it out through having more of a conversational way that you tell your story, even better, because they pick it up themselves.
So that idea and research considered, how should parents be treating that bedtime story hour? Should we be reading from a book, or should we be more sharing stories ourselves?
I think you can do a little bit of both, and it's just like anything else. I've talked to parents who go, well, I'm not good at telling stories. Well, it takes practice, just like anything else, and I think consistency is one of the biggest things. In parenting in general, consistency is great, so I tell my kids stories every night before bed. Now, it's what I do for a living, so I kind of enjoy it, but my kids love it, and sometimes they want me to just make up a story. Sometimes it's a real story that I experienced in my life. Sometimes it's a story that, you know, you would read, or from a movie that they know, something like that. I think you can mix it up, but personal stories especially, I've found my kids respond to amazingly well if I'm telling real stories that happened to me in my life.
Give us an example. So what's a story that you might have told from your personal life that your kids can learn from?
Okay, so one story my kids love is I was in a race when I was, I think, 9 years old, and it was a couple of miles, and I was battling for first place with this other boy, and at the end of the race there was this big long hill, and by the time I got there I was exhausted. I mean, I was spent. I was thinking I'm gonna lose. He started to pull away, and something kind of amazing happened. My dad was watching on the sidelines, and he started to see this happening, that I was losing steam, and he actually came out next to me. He started running with me, and he looked over and he said, Ty, you can do it. I want you to go win this race. And it inspired me. I felt this new energy, and I kicked in, and I ended up winning the race. But when I was walking home with my dad that day, I remember the exact spot on the road that we were. He stopped and he said, Ty, you'll be successful in anything you do in your life because you've learned to push through the pain. You've learned to keep going when you wanted to quit. You've learned to, you know, just give a little bit more, even though it wasn't convenient and you didn't feel like it. And that lesson has always stuck with me, but my kids understand that lesson now, and I can talk to them and say, remember to push through the pain, because they've heard that story several times, and they love the story, but they really get the message of what it is.
They connect it to you, they connect it to Grandpa. What if, I mean, you do this for a living, as you mentioned. You're a professional storyteller, we could say, but what if parents at home, like you mentioned, say, I'm not a great storyteller, even though kids are begging. I mean, kids always say, tell me about when you were little, Mommy, tell me about when you were little, Daddy. How can you really, what skills can we grasp from you and from your experience experience to help make those stories become more rich?
Well, okay, a couple of secrets, ideas. Number one, make it conversational. There's sometimes, because my kids ask me to make up stories, like they're on this kick where they want me to make up Smurf stories. And so you know the main characters, but you're kind of making this up. So sometimes I'll ask them questions like, what do you think happened next? And they're kind of helping create the story a little bit, so you can do that. But every story is a struggle to solution model. There's kind of a blueprint to it. So think about any kid's story, like Cinderella, for example. She was, you know, ended up being a great princess, but she had this conflict. She had the evil stepmother she had to overcome. Every kid's story is that way. Sleeping Beauty had the witch that she had to fight against. So there's a conflict and a struggle in every story, whether that's, you know, a bad guy or an obstacle to overcome. This actually, my 3-year-old pointed this out to me. I teach this, and one time he asked me to make up a story, and as I started telling it, he said, "Dad, there's no bad guy. That's not a story." And I thought, that's a really good point. There's a conflict, because in storytelling, the struggle is what hooks people.
Right.
We get into it. We feel the emotion of it, right? And we want to relive a story, because if you relive it and the kids experience it, we all know that something you experience is way better than something you're told, right? You remember that message a whole lot better. And so the struggle is the hook, and then the solution's the way you help them. That's where the message comes from. So if you think about just that simple little context of, okay, what's the conflict, and then they overcome it, and there's obviously a lesson that can be learned in the overcoming, that right there can help people a lot.
Great tools right there. So it changes the way we tell stories to our kids now. Ty, thanks for changing everything. Hopefully it changes our kids now with our storytelling.
One Smurf at a time.
When we